What is going on, comic fam? It's your boy, the bearded comic bro, and I'm welcoming back to the show Tim Sheridan. Welcome back, my friend.
Hey, thank you so much for asking me to come back. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We've gotten to talk a lot lately, throughout the last couple of years with, first time it was with Teen Titan Academy, and then brought you on right before Alan Scott Green Lantern series was starting. And then we kind of did a deep dive one time, even just on Masters of the Universe. But we really haven't gotten to spend some time talking about the conclusion and the wrap up of your Alan Scott Green Lantern trade. Look at that. And Eisner nominated story right here.
Can
What?
you can you believe that? That's that was a wild and amazing surprise, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How I mean, for this, like I talk to creators a lot that have Eisners and or nominated for Eisners and things like this, but like for you with a story like that you've completed, like you got to tell the story you wanted to tell, and then like all of a sudden they're like, boom, it's nominated for an Eisner, right? Right. So like how does that change or feel like in those moments when you get that kind of that notice that that was happening?
Yeah, the first one too was the GLAAD Media Award nomination, which
Yeah.
I was, bowled over by because we also get to go to the fancy ceremony that they do, which is really fun because it's like you're at the Golden Globes. Like it literally in the place where they do the Golden Globes. It's a big show. It's on Hulu. You can watch it. So that was really, really fun. And yeah, it is it is wonderful to feel like, you did a good job,
Mhm.
that other people feel like you did a good job. I mean, you have your own sense of like how you feel about the work. I mean, I'm like kind of like any artist. I like a lot of artists. It's hard for me to really gauge the quality of the stuff that I work on. I'm too close to it.
Yeah.
And so you just put it's what artists do. I think you just put it out there in the world and you let other people decide if it's worthwhile or not. And so this one in particular, the Alan Scott book, there was so much ridiculous, you know, fake outrage controversy when the book was starting
Hmm.
that and yet there were so many people who stuck with the book, who were fans of the book, who advocated for the story out there in the fandom, that for me the biggest thing that comes out of award nominations is because awards in creative fields are so weird to me. Like I don't know how we anybody decides this is better than this or this wins in this scenario. Like they're all the nominees. The fact that you get elevated as a group of nominees is
Yeah.
incredible to me. To pick one is wild. Um, but there were people who were kind of like, stuck with it when all these people online were telling them that they were wrong and stupid and, should not like the book. And to me, the ultimate satisfaction is when the community, when the industry says, no, this is worth your time.
Yeah.
Let's nominate it. It I think it's a message to all those fans who stuck with us and who enjoyed it and who advocated for the story and for people to pick it up. It's to tell them, hey, you weren't wrong. Like there's something here, and um, that to me means everything. I mean, it really means everything. I mean, it's the entire comics business to me is the fandom. The entire
Mhm.
thing. Like I go out and I promote stuff at like comic book conventions all over the world, and for me, like you go and like the people who rep me like have books of mine out there and they charge for autographs and stuff, which is weird, but it's what the industry does.
Yeah.
And but for like you don't make any like I don't artists make money when they go to those places because they draw and they do commissions and things. I don't make money when I go there. I go to these things because I want to meet and talk to fans, and I get to all the time, and it's wonderful. And so many of the I see those faces in my head when the Eisner nomination came in. I can see those folks who walk up holding the books that they brought from home, the Alan Scotts that they want to get, a signature on, and they want to talk about the story. I think about what it means to them
Yeah.
to to have, the industry say, "Hey, this is pretty good." Um, so that to me, that's everything. I know that sounds like such a honest to God, it sounds like a pageant answer. Like it sounds so like what you want to hear is me go, yeah, I did it, you know. But that's not, it's just not me. And that's not how I feel. How I
Yeah.
feel about it is, it's wonderful. But for me, the people, and it's wonderful for our whole team.
Right.
But the people that I really, really think it's for are the fans,
Yeah.
and for me, that's wonderful. I don't, I don't know, I don't know why I'm like that, but that's just how I feel about it.
Well, it makes sense, right? As a fan, as someone like, when the Eisners come out, like we have conversation with a buddy, like, of like I wasn't reading this book or something, and they were like, you should read this. I'm like, I don't know. And then it gets
Right.
not nominated for an Eisner. Like, oh, I told you. I'm like, oh, dang it. Yeah, you were right.
That's right. It does. It's sort of and lends a kind of legitimacy to those opinions and makes you feel, but then there's all these other great books that
Right.
don't get nominated. And it's like everybody still has to get out there and advocate for those too.
Right. There's still, yeah, when there's only so many creators and things that can get nominated.
Can you believe the freaking category though that we're nominated in? I mean, look, I tell people, I'm like, look at that category, and I will tell you this is the very definition of it is an honor just to be nominated. I mean, and I really mean that. I really do, because these are the people that are the biggest names doing the biggest things in our industry, and they're amazing, talented, incredible people telling great stories, and to be even in the conversation
Mhm.
with Tom and James and Ram and Mariko is unbelievable to me. And by the way, I'm naming the writers because I think in terms of writing,
Right.
but I mean that Helen book is beautiful. It's
Oh,
absolutely beautiful.
yes. Yes.
And Ram's book is gorgeous. The anyway, I'm it's it was quite a year in comics, and I can't believe we got invited to the party.
Yeah. One of the things that I do hear a lot, people say like when they've been nominated for an Eisner or received won an Eisner, that it brings on people that might not have checked out stuff of theirs previously, like past stuff. So is there something if someone's coming into the world of Tim now because of this nomination that you're like, ooh, this would be one that I'd recommend people check out?
It's not going to make any sense to people, but when you read, well, we'll talk about this year's DC Pride, I'm
Yes.
sure, at some
Yes.
point. But when you read that, it's very much kind of a coda to the Alan Scott story. It has a lot of connections to it, uh, sort of uh, sort of spiritually connected. These two books, but there's a character I put in my one of my stories in the DC Pride book, which is a character from Teen Titans Academy, a character named Stitch. And so it sounds strange to say it because they're so different in terms of the types of books they are, I guess. Although if you really, I said somebody could write an essay about how they're similar. But if you liked the Alan Scott story and you never checked out Titans Academy, probably because you heard people trashing it or something, because there were a lot of people who were not who thought that book was going to be something different than it was.
Yeah.
And I think they were disappointed. And I get that. Like, I think, I make a joke about it in DC
You do.
Pride, but it's funny because it's true, right? Because it's, and I'll spoil it here, which is that, Stitch introduces themselves to Connor Hawke and says, list of things. And then I'm, former student body president at Titans Academy. And Connor says, yeah, whatever happened to that? And Stitch says, I think we sold it wrong. Either or either too much or not enough red X, depending
Yeah.
on who you talk to. Anyway, and then moves on, right?
Yeah.
And to me, like that, those things are true, but it's also funny to sort of break the kind of bend the fourth wall a little bit with it.
Mm.
Um, but I would recommend people check out that story, and it's a hard one to read because it starts in Future State, Teen Titans, and Shazam, four issues there, and then it kind of goes back, and we do volume one of Titans Academy. We do Shazam 1 through 4, which was a little mini series we did in 2021, and then volume two of Titans Academy, which takes you up to issue 15 when we ended the series. So that's but I would go back and look at that because I think a lot of people didn't pick up that book. Um, for various reasons. And now they might see something in it. They think that I have something, my voice
Yeah.
is worth their time. You know, I created that book with Rafa Sandoval, who is having wonderful success with Absolute Superman right now.
Hmm.
And I can't say enough about that man. I love him. I love his work. He was an incredible partner on Titans Academy, and then we had some other great artists come in as well on that book. We had two issues and a bunch of covers by Steve Lieber, who was somebody who I just like couldn't believe when they told me that I was going to get. I When they said who might you want to work with, the first name I said to them was Steve Lieber at DC, and they were like, yeah, yeah, right, because he was coming off of Jimmy Olsen and stuff,
Right.
and they kind of laughed in my face. And then he had an opening, and we needed to fill in a couple of issues, so he came in, and then Tom Derenick that guy's a workhorse. He came in and finished out the series with me, and he just surprised and delighted me every day, which was wonderful. We had a lot of great people come in that book. We had five, I think, different editors at different points on that book because DC and Warner Brothers were going through all this weird upheaval. People were leaving the company and coming to the company, and it was a wild and wicked time to make a comic book, to make your first comic book. The only time I did something that kind of looked like an ongoing series, although my story was only supposed to be 12 issues, I ended up doing 15. Anyway, long answer to say, I hope people will pick up
Yeah.
Titans Academy. Everywhere I go in the world, fans come up to me and they say, I really loved Titans Academy. And I always say the same thing to every one of them, which I feel bad. I'm always like, oh, you're the one. But it just delights me to no end to meet people who enjoyed that story because we put so much work into it in up against really weird odds. Like all the time, crazy stuff was throwing. Like it was a trial by fire, that book. Alan Scott was more like I was a little bit more established. I had done Flashpoint Beyond with Jeff Johns and Jeremy Adams, and Jeff sort of opened the door for Alan Scott to happen. And so I feel like I was able to tell the story that I wanted to tell and didn't really have anybody in my face, on a daily basis the way I felt like I did on Academy. So it's a little bit more me on a plate, I would say.
Yeah.
Although I'm still proud of Titans Academy. I think that like even against all that weird adversity we got from just editorial stuff we had to juggle and fix and change and just constant weird things going on. The fact that we were able to put together the story and finish out that story was it's a feat in itself. So
Yeah.
I'm really proud of it.
Yeah. And you mentioned you started to head into there, and so I want to kind of go with that. You mentioned when you got to Alan Scott here, you were able to kind of tell the story you wanted to tell. Um, for if someone has is listening to this and they're like, oh, I should check this out because I hadn't and it's nominated, like I need to read it. What was the story that you wanted to tell that you got to tell here, and how did you kind of come about that idea?
Um, you know, I, I think when I first started thinking about it, like Jeff called me and said, "Hey, they're going to greenlight this Alan Scott book that, he pitched the New Golden Age to DC and he pitched a lot of books and they greenlighted Jay Garrick and Alan Scott and Wesley Dodds, Dodds. And so, he's like, "Well, what, he said you should write this book. You have a story, I'm sure." And I was like, "Do I?" So I kind of Jeff and I had a great conversation. We talked a lot about the Crimson Flame and the Red Lantern and sort of what that means to Alan and who he was and so once we kind of clicked on he and I in that conversation on what that was, that opened up the whole thing for me. So it ultimately what I wanted to tell, there's a couple of things about this story that are let me tell you what I wanted to do, and then let
Yeah.
me tell you some of the other challenges that came about with that story. I wanted to tell an authentic, honest story about being queer in the world, what it meant and how what it meant in the middle of the 20th century, in the 1930s and 40s, how those things are still and can be true and are still true today. Um, I wanted to tell a story about uh, self-acceptance, learning to love oneself. I mean, I talk about, and then we did a preview, a prologue, 6-page prologue story that came out in, months before the book. And it was in DC Pride Through the Years, which was a anthology of like reprints of stuff. It was the only original story in it. It's in the trade paperback of Alan Scott. It's the
Yes, it opens up with it,
first,
right?
yeah, the first 6 pages
Yep.
are the prologue story that we did months before. So you see a lot of the same information from that repeated in issue one when you read the, because I had people read the trade and they're like, wait a minute, I thought we just said that. Yeah, it was months later. I was repeating the thing. Because a lot of people didn't read this prologue story. Anyway, it says at the end of that, it's like the story I'm going to tell you is a story about, big cosmic stuff and, all this thing. And, and then, about life, death, and love, or life and death and all these things. And then it says, in short, a love story. And that's what it is. I mean, I wanted to tell a love story, but not a love story. Like I wanted it to feel like a love story between a villain and a hero. And it is that on one level. But in fact, that story is about someone figuring out who they are and learning to love themselves for who they are. It literally ends with Alan Scott, you know, moving through time to deliver a message to his younger self to tell him, hey, you're loved, you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that I really wanted to do. Now, here's the the challenges are I'm writing a superhero story, right? So that needs to be the core of the story, the heart
Mhm.
of the story, but it's got to be fun. It's got to be interesting. It's a murder mystery as well for a little while in the book. There are things like that you have to kind of, in terms of plot, I had to kind of grapple with and figure out how to work through. I didn't want to do two different time periods in the book, but it ended up being that I had in order to tell that story. So I don't like jumping back and forth in flashback and stuff. It can be difficult in comics, I find, but it just became necessary for the story. But the big thing that happened with that book was I realized very quickly that we were going to be doing this book in October, not in June, that this wasn't a book for a queer audience. This wasn't for readers who understood what Alan was going through. There were going to be a lot of people who pick up this book who don't know queer history, who don't know what it means and what it feels like to be a member of the LGBTQIA plus community in this day and age, and certainly not in the middle of the 20th century. And so, in order for them to understand Alan's feelings of shame and isolation that he's dealing with at the beginning of the story, in order to understand the darkness that leads ultimately to the light in the Alan Scott story, they would have to get a little bit of a history lesson. So there needed I found I needed to deliver some of that stuff.
Mhm.
And that becomes plot, but it's also character. I mean, Alan checks himself into Arkham Asylum in issue 2 to undergo an early version of conversion therapy. Himself, like he decides to do that because that's what made sense at that time to him and to a lot of people. Um, and he learns a lot about himself. And it's one of the moments we see him really leveling up and becoming a hero. We retell his origin story from All American Comics 16, and which is retold in Secret Origins 18. And we tell it from a new perspective in that as well. So there were those kind of challenges that came along that I realized as I was working on it, that there's more to do here. There's more housekeeping that we have to do in order to make this story work, in order to make it land. And so ultimately, a story that was about a man coming out of the darkness into the light uh, ended up having, some more responsibility attached to it. And I think we were able to do a pretty good job of setting the stage and making people understand kind of what things were like then. The part that I think I don't know that we didn't try, I didn't really try to make a direct connection to the fact that those things are still happening today.
Mhm.
It's sort of an undercurrent. I think pe queer people who read it say, "Oh yeah, this stuff in the 30s and 40s, that's still happening." But probably people who aren't as familiar with our story don't know that. So
Yeah.
that's why I like coming on here and telling people, "Hey, when you read the book, that stuff's not in our
Right.
past. That stuff is still our present."
Yeah. And you mentioned um that it's a love story, but it's also about self-love, right? And like there was a
Yeah.
moment, there was a scene, I think it was in issue 5, where they're going through like, Alan, when you did this, when you did this, when you checked, when you saved this person, like that's showing you who you are. And it's like, I think you even said to the line, like, you are special in that moment. And like that is one of those impactful moments where I was like, yeah, okay, like you're reading it and you just go, that's
You know,
so
nobody ever
important for
calls
us.
out nobody ever calls out that scene or that moment, but I love that moment so
Yeah.
much. It's a conversation with the Emerald Flame, right? The Emerald Flame is talking to Alan and kind of like it's an important conversation because Alan doesn't understand where his powers come from. He doesn't understand why he has them, why he's deserving of it. He can't figure it out. He's just been kind of doing the next thing. And now he finally gets a little bit of background. And so the Emerald Flame, in the form of his former lover Jimmy, tells him, he's like, you haven't figured it out by now. Let me just lay it out for you. Let me explain to you why we, this entity, chose you to do this. And he gives him a list of the things that you've seen in the book and some stuff that you didn't that we alluded to in the book, but that happens in his origin story, classic origin, and like the stuff with Albert Decker, which was the rival in the railroad industry. Um, uh, but he says, that for those reasons and more, you have demonstrated your will and your. I think what he tells them is, you every time you're given power, given this power, you use it to make your world better. You use it to make your community better. And that is why you're worthy of this. And that's why we chose you, because you are special. That what you're doing, I don't even think he says you're special, but he says that's special. What
Yeah.
you've chosen to do is
Yeah.
special. And and Alan needs to hear that, it changes his whole outlook.
Yeah. Well, and I think like, and that just is such a prime example of the embodiment of what a hero should be, right? Like of just being selfless, doing what they can to help others. And like it was just one of those moments where I'm like,
And
Alan got to understand it, and then we
well,
as a reader got to go, yeah.
and the piece of it that's important to me personally too is that he tells him, look, when you do those things in service of a world that would condemn you
Hmm.
if they knew more about who you were personally, when you do those things in spite of the fact, to save a world that might not want to save you,
Right.
that makes you a hero, is
Yeah.
what he's being told in that moment. That's important to me because I think that um, it's one thing to have all the advantages of like Superman, and to be a, a straight white kid from Kansas who a man who can who has incredible power and uses it for great wonderful things and good. But it's another thing to be somebody who has spent his life thinking he is a criminal deviant
Yeah.
because that's what his world has made him believe. And yet to still choose, in spite of that,
Mm.
to to love that world and to do good for that world and to save it. Um, to me, that's an extra level of heroism.
Yeah.
The choices you make and the actions you take are what make you a hero, I think is what he's ultimately saying in that
Yeah.
moment. So, um, no diss, I'm not trying to diss Superman. It's the summer of
No.
Superman. I love Superman
Right.
so much. But let's be frank, he's a pretty privileged guy.
Right. We mentioned earlier, DC Pride, and what I found interesting is how much of Alan Scott is a driving force in this issue of DC Pride. And one of the things that I noticed too is it seems a little different from how DC Pride issues have happened in years past, where they're usually like everyone does like a 4-page story, of something, and this seems like it is a there's a little bit of that, but it's all connected. So,
Yeah.
kind of where was the catalyst for DC Pride and getting the team together and using Alan Scott as the driving force? Like, just talk to me about that issue.
I had never contributed to DC Pride. They never asked me to. And so I was kind of always hoping that I'd get a phone call one day. And then Andrea Shea, our lead editor, called me in December and said, "Hey, we're thinking about doing something a little bit different with the Pride anthology this year, which is to make it less of an anthology and make
Yeah.
it a one single connected story that will have the feel of an anthology, but that all the short stories will all be part of a larger story." And she said, "Would you be interested in taking a crack at telling that larger story and bringing it all together and kind of, working with all the writers on their individual stories to make sure it all would flow and tie together?" And and I mean, I was, very excited because she said, "Look, what we think we want to do is, reason why we're talking to you is because we think it maybe should be centered around Alan Scott
Mm.
in some way." And the reason for that was Andrea was looking at the world like all of us and saying, especially because this book, the DC Pride book, is typically the market for that book is typically a queer audience. And and we're looking at the world, we're looking at 2025, and there's a lot of fear, there's just a lot of feelings right now. I mean, fear is the number one
Yeah.
feeling. A lot of anger, a lot of resentment, a lot, those things, but fear above all else. And and she wisely said, "We don't want to ignore that. Like the Pride book, Pride is a celebration, but what we're celebrating, we get there's a lot of things to celebrate, and it doesn't necessarily have to read like, a pride parade in print, which is what I would say. Like although those are wonderful. There's a place for those kind of books, and they've done very well with those kind of books. But we should also celebrate all the struggles that we've gone through and the things that we've come up against and overcome, and to do that now for a younger generation that has had it surprisingly good for a while in terms of the queer community.
Mm.
I think there's a lot of younger people who have grown up on a seeing the world on a progressive trajectory of acceptance, as more and more of the world has accepted queer people and they kind of, I'm sure, rightfully felt like, well, that's just the road we're on, and it's going to just keep getting better. I mean, we literally have a slogan that says it gets better, which can be interpreted or maybe misinterpreted to think it's always going to go,
Right.
forward. Um, but I'm here to tell you, because I've been around a little bit, that this 2025 is no different
Mm.
than the other years that we've had, the other challenges that we've had. And so it's important for us to sort of talk to that community, especially the younger people in the community, and say, "Hey, we've been through this stuff. We've been through it before, and we've overcome. We've been made stronger because of it, because of the adversity." I mean, when we reached out to all the writers we were asking to work on DC Pride this year, I wrote them a little note, and in it I was like, look, we've come up, we're up against a lot of adversity right now, but
Mhm.
queer people eat adversity for breakfast, uh, that's what we've always done, and I think that's a good message for a younger crowd who maybe doesn't know our history, doesn't know what we've been through before and how we've overcome it and how we're all still here and we're going to be here. Supposed to be a message of hope. And that's why Andrea wanted Alan Scott to sort of lead the charge on that, because Alan Scott is a character that represents the light coming out of the darkness. And that is the ultimate symbol of hope. And I think that um, that was what we were trying to achieve with DC Pride. I think ultimately, we told a fun story. It's complicated. It's messy. It's messy in a way that I feel is the queerest thing about the book. It's crazy and messy, but it's full of heart. And And I think that that's the ultimate expression of pride, of LGBTQ pride, you know. Um, so yeah, so that was the calculation. It started with Andrea,
Yeah.
but she said, you know, and it wasn't just Andrea. I know, like there were conversations at DC that this is what they wanted to do, and I was very grateful that they called me to help out and tell that story.
Yeah. So what was the experience of, creatively with the team? Like how much of it was collaboration, through and through of conversations, and how much was it like pitches kind of here or there? Like what was the creative process for this
So
book with everyone?
I wrote kind of an outline for what the overarching story was.
Okay.
And would be and what it is now, and shared that with the writers that we brought in. Andrea wanted to do a couple of things. First of all, bring in some voices who we hadn't had in the book, and you see that with the artists and the writers that hadn't been part of Pride before. And then also, there are a couple of returning as well, but also, you know, to bring them in, and then we basically Andrea handed them a list of all the characters that were sort of fair game for us to use in the DC universe and said, here you go. Like,
Yeah.
who inspires you? Who do you want to tell a story about? What's your pitch? You know, let us hear it. And so we heard from these writers on a, you know, we had just, it was really one call that we had where everybody kind of like said, yeah, I like this. I like this. I want to do this. This is the story I would tell. And all of it like really worked right away. I can't even, it's funny, I can't even think of any of the stories. Sure, we sort of rejected something, but I don't remember it now. I feel like everything we kind of like, we're like, okay, great. Like, 'cause I think it was important, you know, that whatever that some, you know, there was something they wanted to tell. You know, we gave them a little guidance to kind of keep the story, you know, connected to the main story here and there. But mostly we just kind of let the writers tell their individual short stories the way they wanted to tell them. And then when we got to sort of putting the book together, then I came back in and kind of asked for like ins and outs and ways to connect the short stories to the main story here and there. And you know, everybody was really helpful and supportive with that. It was a really great experience. It was a community. It was not like writing for TV where you're in a writer's room and
Yeah.
everybody's all together working all the time. It was it was kind of a weird cousin of that. You know, we kind of started, here's the idea, you know, go have fun, bring it back. They brought back their stuff. We kind of massaged it here and there to kind of make it all work as one story, and then ultimately put the book together. Now, all of that, it sounds like I had a great deal to do with all that. I was sort of a mascot in a lot of ways. I was on the sidelines cheering people on. But the people who really did the work of making this book into this story, this one large story, are the editors, you know,
Yeah.
Andrea Shea and the team of editors that worked on this book. You know, that's they it's a labor of love and they do an amazing job. You know, but it was if we're going to tell a story about community
Hmm.
and why community is important and how community how joining together and working together as a community makes us all better and you know lifts all boats, then for goodness sake the behind the scenes should feel like that.
Yeah.
And it certainly did from day one. It was nothing but support and love and a bunch of people who had a crazy idea to do this book. And it, I told Andrea Shea all the time, I'm like, Andrea, this is no way to make a comic book because there were times where we're just like, what are we, this is crazy. What are we doing? Like, this is insane. Because it was fast and it was big and it was splashy and but again to me that's the queerest thing about it is it's big and it's brash and messy and that just feels right. That feels like who we are. So yeah, it was a joy and the what we say in the story about the importance of community we played out behind the scenes which
Yeah.
to me is the ultimate you know point of satisfaction of the whole project.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I appreciated too about you know, the DC Pride issue was it didn't take away anything that was done before already in Alan Scott Green Lantern. And
Oh no.
it adds in, it adds a nice little touch, in your story of kind of Alan still is, even as much of the hero he is, Alan still is processing and dealing with things and trying to figure stuff out still along the. It's not like oh, my journey's complete now at the end of this book. Now it's all good.
I mean, yeah, there's this piece that's lingering out there with Alan after the miniseries, which is that he had an awakening.
Yeah.
It changed his love, the first love of his life, maybe the only real love of his life, maybe. I don't know. You have to ask him. Um, but, didn't really exist.
Yeah.
And that is psychologically, that's a mess for him because there's so much emotion. And remember, his entire character, his powers, everything is connected to emotion. And those feelings have got to be incredibly messy and complicated. And so to meet him, much later in his life and find that he's never really been able to put to bed, Johnny, this
Yeah.
person that really didn't exist, um, and was a tool that was used against him. That's complicated shit, you know? And so that's it's a part of his journey. It is sort of dealing with that unresolved, you know, part of his life. He's got to find some closure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, gang, if you haven't checked out Alan Scott Green Lantern or DC Pride, by all means do that.
Please.
Tim, I want to respect your time, but I would be remiss if I didn't at least briefly touch on you're in a whole nother universe too, working on some stuff. And I have never read Star Trek comics until I saw your name on it. So you're writing Star Trek Lower Deck right now.
Oh my gosh, I am a huge Trekkie my whole life. I'm like, from the earliest days. I've seen every minute of Star Trek on screen ever. I've read most, most novels, most comics, but I can say, I've seen everything that they've ever put on screen, and uh, I um but I've never gotten to play in that sandbox.
Yeah.
And so Heather Antos, the editor, the great Heather Antos came to me and started kind of talking about it and asked me like, "What's your favorite Star Trek? What's your favorite era of Star Trek?" And I said, "Well, first of all, like the DC comics in the '80s were some of the first comics I ever got when I was a kid. They were all original cast movie universe stuff. Peter David, and Mike Carlin, um, and uh, and so I said that stuff means everything to me. I'd love to work in that world. But I said, but if we're talking about current Star Trek, the best Star Trek that's out there is Lower Decks. And she's like, "Oh, really?" And then months later, we were at San Diego Comic-Con, and she pulled me aside and she said, "Hey, what do you think about maybe jumping onto Lower Decks for a little bit?" And didn't tell me that I'd be following Ryan North, which was maybe the dumbest calculation I've ever made. I'm like, once I figured out he was, I was going to be following him, I was like, well, maybe I made a mistake. No, I did. I could not turn her. First of all, Heather has a way of just overpowering you. So I was like, yeah, I have to do this. But also, it's my chance to write some Star Trek. Also, Lower Decks, you never watch the show. Lower Decks is a love letter to the whole history of Star Trek and the whole fandom. And so, as a fan, as a lifelong fan, you feel taken care of by that show. And I felt like it would give me a chance to sort of talk about and have fun with all these little pieces of the lore that I've never gotten to sort of play with. So I jumped on it, and I'm very happy. The first issue came out and was well received, which I was terrified. I was so terrified. I was like, oh, people are gonna hate this. They're gonna hate it. And but they liked it. I've been finding my feet. I just got back notes on my most recent, like my sixth issue, and And Heather's like, I think you're finally figuring out this, your voice with this crew and how it works. I was like, yeah, I think it's taken me, 6 issues to really find it. But, you watch me finding it throughout the thing.
That's so good. Well,
Yeah.
Tim is again, respect your time here. So, is there anything that we
I
haven't
got all
touched
the
on that
time in the
you
world for you. What are you talking about?
I know. Is there anything we haven't touched on that you wanted to just highlight or note of just stuff in comics or stuff you're working on or stuff you've worked
No,
on?
there's stuff that I'm working on that I can't really talk about yet. I'm sort of getting serious about doing oh, I've always worked for the man, and so now it's like I got to get serious about creator owned
Yeah.
books. And so I'm writing something right now, and I don't know what form it's, where it's going to end up or how we're going to do it, but it's a story I really believe in and I really think it'll be fun. So I'm working on that, but and other stuff, this that stuff I can't really talk about. I actually don't have anything right now. I don't have anything lined up at DC. I would love to. I have pitches, and I have things that I want to do and toys I want to play with. I've got another Alan Scott story I really want to tell one day, um, but no, so far, you know, just kind of sitting here waiting by the phone like this. Um, but but yeah, so that's it. But I hope people, if you like Star Trek, I hope if you like Lower Decks, I hope you check that out. Check out DC Pride. It's not, this. I feel like it's not. A lot of people probably don't pick up DC Pride because they think, oh, well, that's for the LGBT audience. It's
Mm.
not for me. And I think the Alan Scott book is one that some people might not have picked up because they thought, oh, well, that's why would I pick that up? That's for LGBT people. No, it's not at all.
Right.
In fact, if anything, please pick those books up because they are a way for LGBTQIA plus creators to reach out and to invite you in and tell you a little bit more about us and our story. And hopefully what you take out of that is that we're not all that different and that you might find that these stories are for you and that you do identify with, some of the things, and just because your, you know, identity isn't the same as the people in the book doesn't mean that you can't learn from it and take from it and enjoy it. I mean, queer people have been doing it our whole lives, reading stories about straight people and characters, and they still are meaningful to us. They still, tell us incredible stories that we love. So it works the other way too. So check out those books and cheer us on. The Eisner voting has already taken place. It's already done, but you know, we're up against it's a tough category, but I'm just it's an honor to be in there with those folks, and I can't wait to go to the ceremony in San Diego. I'm going to be sitting there with my husband at the DC table, and apparently it's like 4.5 hours long. So I'll be hating my life probably a half hour in. I'll think, why did I ever write this book? What am I doing here? Um, but it'll be great. It was a really great year in comics, and it'll be fun to celebrate everybody.
Awesome. Well, Tim, as always, it's so much fun to have you on the show talking about comics and everything.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's always a joy. And thanks for doing it at this time, too. This got my day started. I'm in LA. So, this is my first thing I've done today. So now I get to go write some Star Trek.
Woohoo! There we go. Well, gang, like I said earlier, pick up the trade of Alan Scott, Green Lantern, go to your shop, pick up DC Pride, put Star Trek Lower Decks on your poll, and just go support comics.
Yeah.
With that being said, hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out. Peace.